So I could review an obscure, gory, beautiful anime from the 1980s, or I could do what everyone else is doing and just dunk on Star Wars The Acolyte for fame and fortune. Okay, sorry Genma Wars, but I think I have to talk about Star Wars today, and god damn it, I really hate trends. Yo, I'm Ian Buster Green. I didn't want to do this, but I guess I'm doing this on the basis that I'm reacting to a rumor right now that Disney Plus will inevitably be deleting The Acolyte from its streaming service. And yeah, I guess there's a few things I could talk about here. Now, I was initially going to lay off the show because I know everyone, their older brother, is taking pot shots at the show, and it's hard to be original in this stream of people who are more or less justified, but now that's looking like The Acolyte might get the full Willow Plus treatment, Batgirl treatment, and get straight up erased for tax breaks like it never happened. That's kind of big because that hasn't happened to a Star Wars show up to now. And despite the increasingly worse quality of these Disney Plus Star Wars shows, Disney Plus still is using them as an incentive and being like, hey, sign up for Disney Plus. You can watch all these horrible, poorly made Star Wars shows, and then if you die at your theme parks, you can't sue us anymore. So with the Batgirl example, that was kind of funny because that movie was straight up never released and never seen. And everyone can sleep well at night knowing that movie was not canon. Although I am sad that we don't get to see that Supergirl from the Flash movie again. That girl got robbed. Now, if The Acolyte does get deleted from Disney Plus, does that mean that's also non-canon? Well, I honestly hope not, just because I feel like Disney allowed someone to take a piss in the halls of their once great franchise, and I honestly look forward to whatever attempt literally anyone makes to try and clean that piss up, which is what I kind of wanted to do today, but I'm kind of not feeling it. Alright, so The Acolyte has been canceled, and as always, this was another Disney Star Wars project that was fucked over and doomed from the start, inside and out, made by a team who really didn't care what they were doing and really wasn't stopped or checked along the way, and they just produced another god-awful thing that no one liked. Now, I'm gonna have to agree with everyone that this is horribly, probably the worst Star Wars ever made so far, and before this existed, I would say the worst Star Wars ever made was the one right before this, which was Andor. Andor bored me. It was just a boring show. It was way too long. It was kind of about nothing. And I honestly thought it had the bad quality of a cheaply made British TV show from the 1960s. Now, The Acolyte, though, is somehow worse because while I thought it was more interesting and a little bit more exciting than Andor, it made me honestly upset. And overall, now that's over, I think it was kind of a gross show. Now, I really didn't want to participate in the feeding frenzy around the show, but if it's going to be deleted forever, well, maybe I better talk about it now while it's still out of the open and I don't have to scavenge the junkyard to find wreckage of it. Now, while I'll say that I didn't like the show, I also gotta say that it's completely not cool to be shitting on the show just because a lot of the characters in the show are black and Asian. Now, that was definitely a choice that the white people running the show made, but nonetheless, don't hate on the actors just because of their race. Some of my favorite shows have had black and Asian lead actors, say, Squid Game or Sanford and Son, and I will have some major praise for the Asian leads in this cast. Lee Jung-jae, he gave it his all. He did an amazing first English performance. The man learned English for this role to do his best performance ever as Soul the Jedi. And he was a really cool Jedi. He was emotionally vulnerable, and I liked what he did through the show. I really like Soul, and I really gotta say that Lee got robbed because this wasn't just a show about him as Soul. It was a show where Soul was the enemy of the state. So, yeah, I feel bad for Lee. I really wish he had just played the same character in a more uplifting and optimistic show. I'm also going to give some praise to Manny Jacinto. He seems to achieve some level of stardom from the show as Darth Khmer, so good for him. Hopefully he goes on to do greater things in the future. However, I will justify the hate against the lead actress, Amanda Law, because she got so triggered by the bad reviews of the show that she made a really hateful and hostile diss track that both The Hollywood Reporter and Disney went on record to say that the diss track literally enraged people and only hurt the show. Now, yeah, that was a stupid move on her part. It did piss people off, so mission accomplished, Amanda. You're a big man now that you sang your hurtful hate song and danced on people's broken feelings. I honestly wonder if the hate song was one of the biggest factors in the show's cancellation. Like, this article I'm reading really implies that it was, but maybe they're just talking out their ass. Next up on the political factors, I also gotta say that it's not cool that people are dunking on the show for its primarily lesbian cast and crew, which is another little bit of an oddity. Now, while I once again have to state first off that I have lesbian friends and I'm completely against sexual discrimination of any kind, and I think the way that LGBT people in the country lately have been treated is terrible, I think no one should ever be mocked or hated or denied a job for their sexual preference. However, that's not quite what's going on here, because while there are the usual haters hating on people just for their sexuality, there's an undeniably sus and questionable factor in the way the show was put together, that it was run by lesbians and the lesbian showrunners went out of their way to only hire an exclusively lesbian cast and crew. And in that way, isn't that itself kind of literal sexual discrimination? Like, that's kind of a big red flag in my opinion. Like, to work on the show, you first had to be a woman, and then even if you had a particular resume and skill set as a woman, then you had to say you were a lesbian to work there. Like, that in itself is super sus. Like, was the showrunner just trying to line the office with women that were maybe potential dating partners? Like, isn't that sexual harassment? A man would not be allowed to get away with that. And I've seen recently in the discussion around this some unconfirmed rumors around the show, and people pointing out that some of the women working on the show only came out as gay after they were hired to the show, leading people to wonder if they were ever really gay at all. Like, if someone came up to you and offered you a life-changing $100,000 Star Wars job, and the only condition to getting it was saying out loud for a year that you were a lesbian, well, won't you just lie for the money? Because that seems to be what these people did, and yeah, that's suspicious. Anyway, I'm not going to look into that. What I'm mostly talking about today is the quality of the show and what the show is actually about, because the show is just straight up weird. Like, the characters in the show make some incredibly stupid, incredibly weird, incredibly evil choices throughout the show, and the fact that no one stops them within the show or without the show from the production side kind of speaks to the fact that maybe the people who made this show were living in a bubble and there was no common sense involved in the show, or like no discussion of how people would react to like some of this like craziness. Anyway, so that's all the political stuff here. Now let me get into the real like beans and potatoes of the show. So this show is basically like a complete switcheroo subversion of the expectation that the Jedi are always good guys and the Sith are always bad guys. In this show, the Jedi are corrupt and evil, and even though the show is about a Sith serial killer killing all of them, somehow that's good? Like, it effectively fails to communicate that, and overall it never fully defines why the Jedi are corrupt, other than them fighting a few fights in self-defense and accidentally overkilling some clearly hostile aliens, but also most of the aliens died of like exhaustion. So like, another way you could look at it is, so one of the key plot points in this is that the Jedi try to abduct these two kids from their parents. And yeah, so that on its own, that's pretty fucked up. You could say that the Jedi were out of line for abducting babies here, but they never clearly clarify what was up with that, because the girls in the show aren't just normal kids being raised by their parents, they're being raised by a cult of witches. So I don't know, like, were they trying to make some kind of allegory for like how fucked up it is that the government can take away your children? But at the same time, if you're raising your kids in a weird satanic communist cult, you probably deserve to have them taken away by the government at that point. Like, the plot thread in this show of the Jedi being evil and corrupt, so that was previously a red herring that the Last Jedi and Kylo Ren were using to like seduce Rey to the dark side, but in the Acolyte, the main character fully buys into it, just accepts it at face value, and turns completely batshit evil. And I guess what I'm getting at is like, you could definitely have done a little bit more work to make the show work and do it in an intelligent way. Like, if there were more clear-cut evil Jedi, it seems like they were setting up this ugly-looking Gamora chick to be like the pure evil Jedi who's like hiding amidst like the comforts of government, but they never get around to actually showing why she is so bad, other than the fact she's like manipulating a cover-up. Now, I'm assuming if there was a season 2, maybe they would have gone into that, but they didn't, so now that's just another question mark. Like, they didn't get there fast enough, and all the Jedis in the show are still the good, sympathetic, and cute Jedis that everyone always loves and dresses up as for Halloween. Like, one of them's a freaking beaver. How are you going to hate on the beaver? Like, the Jedi are always aspirational, and even this show that's trying to present the Jedi as evil, like, the Jedis are still, like, you know, nerds and cool and not that evil. Yeah. Like, I can definitely see why Middle America rejected this so hard. Like, there was not enough actual evil done by the Jedi in the show. So, like, presenting them as evil just makes the main characters come off as unhinged, deranged, total psychopaths. Even if I tried to fix this show, I'm kind of stuck with two roots because the show is, like, at odds with itself. The show is so tonally out of whack that I feel like, on the one hand, you had the creators, and the creators wanted to tell a story about the corruption and the evil of the Jedi, and how the Sith were actually the cool good guys who didn't listen to the rules and wanted to live in a gutter and be happy committing murders. Like, once again, it's kind of insane, and it doesn't really mesh with the overall story and the family-friendly nature of the greater Star Wars universe. And then Disney seemingly swooped in and tried to course correct by making it a more standard Star Wars show, by making the Jedi do these good things, but in doing so, they create a Frankenstein monster that kind of appealed to nobody. So then, that being the case, the Acolyte itself is seemingly at odds with the greater Star Wars universe because this core idea is so off from everything that's came before. And that leaves me to, like, start either trying to figure out, do I want to make this more like what the creators wanted and show a show where the Jedi are corrupt and they have a downfall and showing why the Sith were actually cool guys in the end? Or do we want to take a second route where we just say, fuck the show creators, they're insane, and mostly stick to the established Star Wars canon and the 50-year rules of Star Wars? So yeah, thinking it over, the more I think about it, I feel like the creators here were projecting a lot of their personal trauma and personal hatred to their own parents into the series. And it's really icky. It's like the worst possible thing they could have done, and it's revolting to general audience because I know a lot of people have issues with their mom and dad, but also a lot of people don't have issues with their mom and dad. And I want to say that more people in the world like their parents than hate their parents. So yeah, I can't side with that. Like, it's very clear here that the creators had some, like, major parental drama issues that they're trying to vent out through $1 billion Star Wars budget. Whereas, like, normally I would probably be okay with a bold and personal story like that. Ham-fisting it into the Star Wars universe as messily and as ugly as they did just isn't a people pleaser, especially when the Star Wars universe is currently in a weakened state and everyone wants it to just be good again. And yeah, this is just another, like, symptom of a long-running sickness. Now, I gotta spoil one thing to continue my rant. At the end of the show, Osha kills Soul, and it's completely fucked up because I really like Soul. I think everyone likes Soul. Soul really did nothing wrong aside from, like, acting in self-defense and lying to Osha. Now, the lying was kind of fucked, but it definitely comes off as tonally weird that we're seeing a villain kill the hero and the villain being, like, applauded for it. And yeah, Osha is totally the villain of the show, even though she's set up to be the protagonist. It's also seemingly like the complete, totally opposite lesson of the original Star Wars trilogy. So the original Star Wars trilogy ends with Luke and Vader confronting each other, and it ends with this, like, heartwarming message that no matter how much hate, no matter how fucked up your parents are, they're still your parents and you have to love them. Whereas the Acolyte is just the opposite. It's an advertisement for murder. They're literally saying to just kill everyone who's ever wronged you and live your best life as a serial. There's no downside to that, and if your parents disagree with you, kill them too. Again, this is apparently the showrunner projecting that she wants to murder her father. Like, I don't know what her dad did to her. Like, maybe he, like, committed some crimes. Maybe he wasn't a perfect human being. But yo, this lady needs to be checked into therapy. I'm kind of surprised that something so weirdly personal and so absolutely filled with hate and malice was allowed to be turned into $1 million Star Wars movie. Like, if The Acolyte was just a normal horror sci-fi movie about killing your dad, I'm sure a lot of people will have loved it, and it will have offended a lot less people. But it still would have been a fucked up story about killing your dad in the end, and that's what The Acolyte is. So, if I'm trying to rewrite The Acolyte, I just can't agree with what the showrunners did. So let's go down that second road again, where I try to fix The Acolyte by making it more like a normal Star Wars. Now, before I even do that, like, there's so many, like, problems with the lore here that I need to take a second and figure out what the hell is going on. Like, what the hell is the deal with May and Osha, the main characters? So the show posits in the first episode that they're just twins, and one of them was seduced by the Jedi Order, but ultimately dropped out of that and just became a loser minimum wage mechanic. And the other grew up hating the Jedi Order and somehow grew up to be a badass samurai assassin. Now, in a normal Star Wars show, Osha probably would have had an arc where she reconnects with the Jedi, and over the course of the show learns to be a good person again and like believes in herself. But like the lesson here could have been, it's never too late to finish your childhood education and maybe make something decent of yourself. But no, the lesson of the actual Acolyte is be a fucking serial killer. So yeah, instead, somehow over the course of the show, they do this weird identity swap between Osha and May, where Osha randomly turns evil, and at the end, she decides to become the samurai assassin. And meanwhile, May gets lobotomized at the end of the show and is somehow pushed into Osha's position, being escorted by the Jedi around and being fully pacified. I don't understand that, and I kind of hate it. Like, if they're both evil, why aren't they just teamed up at the end, being like the evil murder sisters? Instead, like, they both commit a ton of murders, and now May was seemingly set up to be the good guy in season 2, but that doesn't work. May killed more people than anyone. On top of that, the show drops that they're not even actually twins. They're somehow the same person split in half. I do not get what the show is implying by that. That's never explained. Like, is it like a Posiduck Negaduck thing from Darkwing Duck? Because one of them's always good and one of them's always evil? Did Osha's decision to turn evil force May to turn good? Do they literally always have to be disagreeing on anything? Can they fuse back together into a giant woman? I have so many questions about this. Now, what I think they were trying to get at is maybe somehow the lesbian witches used the Force to split the girls in the womb using their telekinesis, in which case they're just literally twins. They're just twins that were improperly made by evil lesbian space witch magic. Now, that again is the impression I'm gathering together based on the information I was given, but ultimately I'm still not sure because they just didn't clarify anything, and they said they were twins more than they said they weren't twins. So once again, I don't get it. It almost seems like the show doesn't understand its own bullshit or understand what twins are. All right, that's just a handful of the million of answered questions I have about the show, because the show got canceled without ever explaining anything or setting things right. So if I do ever rewrite the show, I'm just going to stick to that last explanation and just accept that they are literally twins, just twins that were made unethically by ripping a fetus in half with magic womb force magic. And also, fuck it, if I'm going full fanfic with this, let's also say that they were conjoined at the arm, and when they were separated, they both lost their arms, and then they got cool robot arms, because Star Wars protagonists are always cooler with robot arms. Now, also, I'm going to say it was really idiotic for the story to be presented in a weird flashback mystery centered on the assassinations of the Jedi, because the mystery was solved way too fast, and also the show really didn't stick to the mystery. Like, it immediately gave you like explanations for stuff that the mystery was actively teasing. It just wasn't compelling, man. Like, a lot of people are arguing it maybe would have been better without that if the show was just presented chronologically, with episode 1 starting with how Soul met like May and Osha as children. I could buy that, and maybe that would work for a superior movie cut down of the story. But if you did that, it would also semi-deflate the interesting mystery of like the comatose suicidal Jedi and like how the witches died, which were probably the biggest mysteries of the show until they were very unsatisfyingly answered. Okay, so now at this point, I was going to review the entire Acolyte, but I already spent 20 minutes arguing about how mad I am about the Acolyte. Now, I actually did sit down today and I tried watching the Acolyte again. I tried writing a summary, I tried thinking about how I could fix the story, but then I decided by about the 3rd episode that this show is just slop. It's mind-numbingly stupid, and I did actually do a write-up of the first 2 episodes, but I don't know if I want to rewatch this show again because it was tough enough the first time. I don't think I'm going to bother because I've already explained why and how the show failed, and I'm just going to leave it there. But I'm not sure if you guys care, so let me know. If you guys do want to see me attempt to rewrite the show, or at least attempt to summarize what it was, if this video gets like 1,000 views and 50 comments, I'll think about doing it. But I kind of don't want to live in this cesspool, and I've got better things to do. So to close out, even though the show was canceled, it deserved to get canceled. But I also don't want to see the show get deleted either, because I feel intensely unsatisfied about the still lingering loose ends that the story brought up, and the fact that, like, overall, I mostly just want to see Osha come back and be punished for Soul's murder. I think Soul deserves justice because Soul really didn't do anything majorly wrong aside from lying to Osha. And I think under a cooler, better writer, like, all these characters could come back as the villains they are and be defeated by some real heroes. All right, that's enough out of me. I'm going back to watching some good, properly made shit from the 80s. Later.